My name is Margaret Caldwell. I spent 40 years as a pediatric nurse, a career dedicated to caring for the most vulnerable. My life has been one of routine, compassion, and the quiet joy found in healing others. I always believed that the greatest threats to a child were fevers and broken bones, things I knew how to mend. I never imagined the most dangerous illness would not be in a child's body, but in the heart of an adult, a poison that could steal not just a life, but a family. It all began to unravel with a simple, innocent question from my 7-year-old grandson, Leo. He looked up at me one sunny afternoon in my garden and asked, "Grandma, why do I have two moms?" He was referring to his mother, my daughter Sarah, who we lost 5 years ago, and to Chloe, my son-in-law David's new wife. The answer to his question would reveal a conspiracy of greed, manipulation, and betrayal so monstrous it would tear our world apart and force me to fight for the truth, for my grandson, and for the memory of the daughter they tried to erase. Before Chloe, our life was a quiet melody played in a minor key. It was sad, yes, but it had its own gentle harmony. After the violent, discordant crash of my daughter Sarah's death, my son-in-law David and my grandson Leo moved into the house with me. The sprawling home where I had raised Sarah, a place once filled with her laughter, had become a cavern of echoing silence. Their presence filled that silence, not with the joy that had been lost, but with a shared purpose, to survive our grief together. Our days were built around Leo. He was the sun, and we, the grieving planets, owed our orbit to him. My life, once dictated by the demanding schedule of a hospital ward, was now governed by the rhythm of a 7-year-old's world. Mornings were a flurry of toast crusts being cut, lunchboxes being packed with notes written on the napkin, and the frantic search for a missing dinosaur toy. I would walk him to the school bus, his small hand tucked firmly in mine, and watch until the big yellow vehicle disappeared around the corner. My afternoons were spent preparing for his return, ensuring the house remained a bastion of stability for him. Sarah's memory was a soft, loving presence, not a morbid shrine. Her photograph had pride of place on the mantelpiece, her smile a gentle blessing on our days. I spoke of her often to Leo, not in hushed, sad tones, but with bright, happy stories. "Do you know your mommy used to put salt instead of sugar in my coffee as a prank? Or, your mommy could climb that oak tree in the backyard faster than any boy in the neighborhood." I was determined that he would know his mother not by her absence, but by the vibrant legacy of her love. David, a good and gentle man, navigated his own sea of sorrow by throwing himself into his work. An architect, he designed buildings with a fierce, focused passion, as if he could create structures strong enough to withstand the kind of foundational crack that had shattered his own life. He would come home exhausted, but he never failed to fold his long frame onto the floor to help Leo build a towering city of Legos, or to read him a bedtime story, his voice a low, soothing rumble. We were a small, wounded family, but we were a family nonetheless. We were healing. I truly believed we were safe. David met Chloe in the spring. It was at a fundraiser for the new city library he had designed. He came home that night with a different kind of light in his eyes, a spark I had not seen since before the accident. He told me about her, a financial advisor who was brilliant and funny and had passionately debated the merits of postmodernism with him for nearly an hour. "She sounds wonderful, David," I had said, and my heart was filled with a complex mix of emotions. I was genuinely happy for him. The weight of his grief had been a heavy cloak, and to see it lifting, even slightly, was a blessing. But beneath my happiness was a different, more primal feeling, a fierce, protective loyalty to my daughter's memory. It felt like a betrayal, a thought I immediately chastised myself for. Sarah would have wanted him to be happy. He started seeing her regularly. The change in him was profound. The deep, weary lines around his eyes began to soften. Laughter, a sound that had been a rare visitor in our house, began to return. He would talk about Chloe constantly, about her wit, her intelligence, her boundless energy. She sounded like a force of nature. Sarah had been like a calm, sunlit garden. Chloe sounded like a brilliant, dazzling firework. I worried David would get burned. He brought her home to meet us on a Sunday afternoon. My first impression was that she was even more striking in person. She was impeccably dressed and moved with a confidence that bordered on aggressive. But she tempered it with a masterful display of charm. She had done her homework. For Leo, she had not brought a simple toy. but a rare architectural Lego set of a Frank Lloyd Wright house, a nod to both his passion and his father's. Leo's eyes went wide with wonder. For me, she presented a beautifully bound first edition of a collection of poems by Sarah's favorite poet. It was a thoughtful, almost eerily perceptive gift. "Hello, Margaret," she said, her smile warm and direct. "David has told me so much about you. It is an honor to finally meet the woman who raised such a wonderful daughter and is now raising such a wonderful grandson." Her words were flawless. She acknowledged Sarah, honored my role, and praised Leo, all in one perfect sentence. She spent the next hour on the floor with Leo, her expensive clothes getting dusty as she helped him begin his new Lego project, her laughter genuine and infectious. She asked me questions about my nursing career, listening with rapt attention. She was perfect, so perfect, in fact, that it felt like a performance. Every word, every gesture, every smile seemed calibrated for maximum effect. I watched David watch her, his face full of adoration, and I felt a chill snake down my spine. He saw a lifeline. I saw a brilliant strategist. I told myself I was being a jealous, overprotective mother-in-law. I desperately wanted to be wrong. They married 6 months later. And then Chloe moved in. The invasion was a slow, creeping occupation disguised as progress. It did not happen all at once. It was a war of attrition. It began with the living room. Sarah had decorated it in warm tones, with comfortable, slightly overstuffed furniture and shelves filled with books and family photos. One week, a new sleek chrome lamp appeared on a side table. "It is just so much brighter, is it not?" Chloe said cheerfully. A few weeks later, the soft, worn Persian rug was replaced by a stark, this geometric one. "It really ties the new lamp in," she explained. The photos of Sarah were the next to move. They had occupied the central space on the mantelpiece. One day, I came downstairs to find them moved to a smaller, less prominent bookshelf in the corner. In their place was an abstract sculpture. "I thought it was time we made the mantelpiece a bit more neutral," Chloe explained, her tone gentle, "and the direct sunlight was causing the photos to fade. I was just trying to protect them. Every change was logical. Every explanation was reasonable. Every act of erasure was framed as an act of care. To argue felt petty, like I was the one clinging to the past while she was trying to build a healthy future. David, eager to embrace this new, happy life, agreed with every change she made. The house was slowly being stripped of Sarah's soul, and I was the only one who seemed to notice or to care. Next came the administration of our lives. Chloe, with her financial background, was horrified by what she called my charming but archaic system of household management. I kept a physical ledger for expenses and paid bills with checks sent by mail. "Margaret, my love," she said one afternoon, coming into the kitchen where I was balancing my checkbook. "Nobody does this anymore. It is all online. It is faster, safer, and so much more efficient. Let me please take this burden off your hands." She sat with me for hours, showing me how she was setting up automatic payments, consolidating accounts, creating digital spreadsheets. It was dazzling, and I felt like a relic from a bygone era. I gave her account numbers, passwords, and information, feeling a sense of relief at first. The burden was indeed lifting. I did not realize that I was not just handing over the chores, I was handing over control. The grocery shopping, the planning of meals, the scheduling of Leo's appointments. She absorbed every domestic task with terrifying efficiency. She would gently mock my old routines. "You were really paying that much for organic milk?" she would say with a laugh. "I found a supplier that is half the price." She was not just managing the house, she was running it like a corporate takeover, optimizing every aspect for efficiency, and in this new streamlined corporation, my role was being made redundant. I was being demoted from CEO to a beloved but ultimately powerless board member emeritus. The first time she lied, it was so blatant and so cruel that it took my breath away. We were having dinner, and David was talking about the financial struggles of a friend. Chloe sighed, shaking her head with a look of deep sympathy. "It is so hard when you do not have a good financial plan." Sarah, bless her heart, was a bit like that. She was such a wonderful, creative soul, but she was not at all practical with money. David and I have had to work so hard to clean up the financial mess she left behind. I stared at her, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth. A mess? Sarah? My daughter had been the most organized, responsible person I knew. She had a healthy savings account, a solid investment portfolio, and no debt to her name. Her life insurance had been the very thing that had kept David afloat in the first few years after her death. The story was a complete and utter fabrication. I opened my mouth to object, to defend my daughter's memory, but I caught David's eye across the table. His face was full of a familiar, sad resignation. He believed her. In his grief, he had handed over all the paperwork to Chloe, and he had accepted her interpretation of it without question. To contradict Chloe now would be to accuse her of lying in front of her new husband. It would be to start a war. I looked at Leo, happily eating his spaghetti, oblivious to the undercurrents of poison at his dinner table. For his sake, I closed my mouth. I said nothing, and in my silence, I became her accomplice. I let the lie stand. It was a small, strategic retreat, I told myself, but it felt like a profound defeat. Chloe shot me a quick, almost imperceptible look from across the table. It was a look of pure triumph. In that moment, I knew with a chilling certainty that this was not just about redecorating or managing a checkbook. This was about power, and she had just won the first major battle. With my role in the household successfully marginalized, Chloe unveiled the centerpiece of her strategy. She called a family meeting one Tuesday evening. The term itself was a farce. Our family was not a democracy. It was a quiet dictatorship, and we were being summoned to receive our orders. She had set up a presentation on the large television in the living room, the screen filled with a professional-looking slideshow titled, "The Caldwell Sterling Family Trust, Securing Our Future." David, already briefed and fully indoctrinated, sat beside her on the cold leather sofa, looking at the screen with an expression of earnest gravity. I was seated opposite them in an armchair that felt like a witness stand. Leo was upstairs, safely tucked away, unaware of the quiet coup happening in his name. For the next hour, Chloe delivered a masterful performance. She spoke with the smooth, confident authority of a seasoned financial guru, using a cascade of complex terms: probate avoidance, asset protection, tax shelters, fiduciary responsibility. She painted a grim picture of what could happen to our assets without her expert management: devastating inheritance taxes, lengthy legal battles, and the risk of our wealth being diluted over time. The solution, she explained, was the trust. It was a legal fortress that would protect us. It meant consolidating everything. My house, which she pointed out was a massively underleveraged asset, my retirement portfolio, David's salary, and the inheritance he had received from Sarah. All of it would be placed into the single, powerful entity. And at the heart of it all, she concluded, clicking to the final slide, is Leo. This entire structure is designed for one purpose: to ensure that Leo's future is unconditionally secure. This is not about us, Margaret. It is about him. It was a brilliant pitch, wrapping a heist in the noble flag of a child's welfare. My practical nurse's mind, trained to see the body beneath the blanket, felt a deep, instinctual alarm. Her plan was not a fortress. It was a cage, and she was convincing us to hand her the only key. "This is my house, Chloe," I stated, my voice steadier than I felt. "Richard and I built it. My name is the only one on the deed." "Of course," she said, her tone patient, as if explaining a simple concept to a confused patient. "And that is the problem. As a standalone asset under your name, it is incredibly vulnerable. By placing it within the trust, you are protecting it. It legally ensures it stays with the family, with Leo. It is the safest thing you could possibly do." I looked at David, searching his face for an ally, for a flicker of the same apprehension. I found none. He was completely captivated by her vision of a secure, professionally managed future. He saw her as our savior. I was beginning to see her as a predator. My hesitation was met with a new, more intense form of pressure. Chloe initiated a campaign of relentless emotional manipulation, a pincer movement designed to corner me from all sides. Publicly, in front of David, she was the soul of patience. "I know this is a big step, Margaret," she would say, her hand on my arm. "We can take all the time you need to feel comfortable." But in private moments, when David was out of the room, her demeanor would shift. She would express a deep, theatrical hurt. "I just do not understand why you do not trust me." She would sigh, her eyes welling with crocodile tears. "All I want to do is protect this family. It breaks my heart that you see me as some kind of enemy." The true pressure, however, came from David. He had become Chloe's most effective weapon. He approached me a few days later while I was in the garden, my one remaining place of solace. He looked exhausted. his face etched with a worried frown Chloe had no doubt engineered. "Margaret, please," he began, his voice low and pleading. "We need to do this." I lie awake at night worrying about Leo's future. What if something happens to me? Sarah trusted me to take care of him, and I feel like I am failing her by not taking this step. Chloe is an expert. She knows what she is doing. This is the one thing that will finally let me sleep at night. He was using my daughter's memory against me, twisting it into a tool for his wife's agenda. "Please do not stand in the way of this," he continued, his voice cracking with emotion. "Do not make Chloe feel like you do not accept her as part of this family. She is trying so hard. We are doing this because we love you, and we love Leo. Can you not just trust me?" It was emotional blackmail of the highest order. He had positioned my refusal not as a prudent act of caution, but as a personal rejection of him, a betrayal of Chloe's efforts, and a threat to Leo's well-being. He was forcing me to choose between my instincts and my relationship with what was left of my family. If I continued to resist, I risked alienating David completely, and I could not bear the thought of losing him, and by extension, losing Leo. I was trapped. "Okay, David," I whispered, the words feeling like stones in my throat. "I will sign the papers." The relief that washed over his face was so profound it almost made me believe I had done the right thing. Almost. Chloe did not waste a moment. The signing was scheduled for that Friday. She staged it not as a cold legal transaction, but as a celebration. She cooked an elaborate dinner and opened a bottle of expensive champagne. She had even invited a notary public, a polished woman who was clearly a friend of hers, to officiate. The documents were spread across the glass dining table, a mountain of paper filled with dense, impenetrable legal text. Chloe walked me through them, her explanations smooth and reassuring, reducing complex clauses that transferred decades of my life's work into simple, harmless-sounding phrases. "This just gives me trustee authority to manage the portfolio," she would say, pointing to a paragraph that, I now know, gave her absolute power to buy, sell, and leverage any asset in the trust without my consent. I felt a dizzying sense of unreality. My hand trembled as I picked up the heavy, official-looking pen. The nurse in me, the woman trained to assess, to question, to never act without full information, was screaming in silent protest. My instincts, honed by a lifetime of experience, were a siren in my soul. This was wrong. This was dangerous. But then I looked up. I saw David, his face beaming with happiness and relief, raising a glass of champagne to me. I saw Leo's crayon drawing of our new family taped to the refrigerator door. To refuse now would be to detonate a bomb in the middle of our fragile peace. It would mean declaring that I believed my son-in-law was a fool and his wife was a liar. So I silenced the screams. I ignored the sirens. I chose what I thought was my family over my own better judgment. I signed my name over and over again, my signature a testament not to my agreement, but to my defeat. The notary smiled, stamped the pages, and just like that, the life Richard and I had built no longer belonged to me. Chloe raised her glass. "To the future," she said, her eyes glittering with triumph. I drank the champagne, and it tasted like ash. With the ink on the trust documents barely dry, Chloe's behavior underwent a chilling transformation. The pretense of deference was gone, replaced by an undisguised monarchical authority. She now had the power, and she had no intention of hiding it. Her campaign to erase Sarah became blatant and cruel. The final blow came with the photo albums. I kept them on a low shelf in the living room, and Leo and I would often look through them together. They were his only tangible link to the mother he could barely remember. One afternoon, I came downstairs to find the shelf empty. A cold dread washed over me. "Where are the albums, Chloe?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Chloe was arranging a new soulless vase on the mantelpiece. She did not turn to look at me. "I have put them in storage," she said, her voice casual. "It is time for him to move on." I walked over to her, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "You have no right." She finally turned, and her eyes were completely devoid of the warmth she had once feigned so well. They were cold and flat. "Margaret, I am his mother now. My psychologist friends agree that constantly exposing him to images of his deceased mother is creating an unhealthy attachment and preventing him from fully bonding with me. It is for his own good. I am his grandmother, and I will not let you steal his mother's memory from him. Then you are the one who is harming him," she said, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. If you continue to undermine my authority and confuse that boy, I will have no choice but to take steps to protect him from your influence. Do you understand me? It was a direct threat. She was not just taking the albums, she was threatening to take Leo himself. I appealed to David that night, my voice shaking with rage and despair, as I recounted the conversation. He listened, his face a mask of weary conflict. Margaret, he said with a heavy sigh, I know you're upset, but maybe she has a point. Maybe we have been clinging to the past too much. She is a professional, and she is only thinking of what is best for Leo. He needs a living mother. Please, just try to work with her. For me, for Leo. It was then that I truly understood the depth of my isolation. My own son-in-law, the man I had sheltered and supported, had become my jailer. He was a willing accomplice in the annihilation of his first wife's memory. My world began to shrink until it was only the size of my own home, and even that no longer felt like mine. Chloe's gaslighting became a daily ritual, a constant erosion of my reality. She would change appointments in my calendar and then feign surprise when I missed them. She would tell David I had agreed to things I had never discussed. She was building a comprehensive case against my competence. My friends were the final wall to fall. My best friend, Eleanor, called to invite me for lunch. Chloe answered the phone. Oh, Eleanor, thank you for calling, I overheard her say, her voice dripping with sympathy. But Margaret is not up to it. She has been having a very difficult time lately, very confused. The doctor says she needs absolute quiet. I will be sure to give her your love. I confronted her, my heart pounding. Eleanor called. Why did you not tell me? Chloe's face became a mask of concern. Oh, you were napping so peacefully, I did not want to disturb you. You seem to be forgetting our conversations, Margaret. I told you about it just this morning. Do you not remember? Her lies were so bold, so confident, that for a terrifying moment, I did not. The doubt was a poison seeping into my every thought. Was I going crazy? Was I becoming the senile, difficult woman she described? I would look in the mirror and see a stranger, her eyes filled with a fear and confusion I did not recognize. I was living behind a glass wall. I could see the world, my friends, my own life, but I could not reach it. Chloe was the gatekeeper, the narrator of my life, and she was writing me into a tragedy of her own design. The pain was no longer a sharp, acute thing. It was a chronic condition, a dull, constant ache of powerlessness and despair. I was a prisoner in my own home, and the person I was supposed to be was slowly, methodically being erased. I had lost my daughter, I had lost my financial independence, and now I was losing my mind. I was at the absolute bottom with no hope of rescue. The awakening, when it came, was not a thunderclap of revelation. It was a child's whisper. It happened on a beautiful Saturday afternoon in early summer. Chloe and David had gone to a wine tasting event, a rare occasion that left me and Leo to our own devices. It felt like a blessed reprieve, a return to the simple, peaceful days before the house had a chill in its bones. We were in the garden, my sanctuary, the one place Chloe had not yet managed to conquer and sterilize. We were tending to the roses that Sarah had helped me plant years ago, their blossoms a riot of defiant color. Leo was chattering away, telling me about a dream he'd had about a flying dog, his small hands carefully patting the rich, dark soil around a new bloom. He fell silent for a moment, his brow furrowed in the way it always did when a serious thought was brewing deep within his 7-year-old mind. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and earnest. The same impossible shade of blue as his mother's. Grandma, he said, his voice small and clear in the warm air. Why do I have 2 moms? The question hung between us, simple and profound. I knelt beside him on the soft grass, my gardening trowel forgotten, my heart giving a painful lurch. What do you mean, sweetheart? Well, he explained patiently, as if to a fellow child who was a bit slow on the uptake. I have my first mom, Mommy Sarah, who lives in heaven and is a star now, and I have my new mom, Mommy Chloe, who lives here. He paused, picking at a loose thread on his jeans, and then delivered the line that would detonate the foundations of my world. Mommy Chloe said she is my new mom because my first mom did not want to be my mommy anymore, so she went away to be a star instead. The world tilted. The sweet scent of the roses turned sour and suffocating in my nostrils. I felt the blood drain from my face, a cold, sickening rush. Of all Chloe's calculated cruelties, of all her systematic erasures and manipulations, this was the most monstrous. She had not just erased Sarah, she had maligned her. She had twisted the tragedy of a fatal accident into a selfish act of maternal abandonment. She had planted a seed of poison in the heart of my grandson, a lie designed to make him forever doubt the love of the mother who had adored him more than life itself. In that single, horrific instant, all the pain, all the doubt, all the grief in my heart was incinerated. It burned away in a flash of pure, white-hot rage, and what was left was something hard and clear and unbreakable. I was not crazy. I was not a bitter, jealous old woman clinging to the past. I was a witness to a crime, a slow, methodical theft of a child's heritage and a mother's legacy. The fog of her gaslighting was gone. My mind, which had felt so clouded and unreliable, was suddenly sharp, every detail of the past 2 years clicking into place with terrifying clarity. The nurse in me, the gentle caregiver, was gone. She was replaced by a mother and a grandmother who would now do whatever it took to protect her own. My grandson needed a protector, and my daughter needed a champion. The time for quiet sorrow was over. It was time for war. That night, I did not sleep. I sat in the dark of my room, and I planned. The next morning, I began the most difficult performance of my life. I became the woman Chloe thought I was. I was quiet, withdrawn, and even more forgetful than before. I apologized to her for being so emotional lately, claiming the doctor thought my blood pressure was affecting my memory. I saw the look of smug satisfaction in her eyes. She believed she had finally broken me. My performance gave me the freedom I needed. A few days later, I told Chloe I had a sudden craving for a specific pastry from an old German bakery on the other side of town, a place I had not visited in years. It was the perfect senile whim. Chloe, busy with a conference call, was irritated but saw no harm in it. She gave me money and called a taxi. No doubt pleased to have me out of the house for a few hours. But I did not go to the bakery. I directed the taxi to a modest brick building in a quiet neighborhood, the former law office of Daniel Sterling. Daniel had been my late husband's lawyer, and more importantly, his friend. He was a brilliant, cantankerous bulldog of a man who had retired a few years ago. He was sharp, cynical, and had a profound distrust of anyone who smiled too much. He was perfect. He greeted me at the door of his home office looking older, his hair completely white, but his eyes were as sharp and intelligent as I remembered. He was surprised to see me, but ushered me in, his gruff demeanor softening with concern. "Margaret, what is it? You look like you have seen a ghost." "I am afraid I am living with one, Daniel," I said, and then I told him everything. I started with Chloe's arrival and ended with the monstrous lie she had told Leo in the garden. I laid out the story piece by piece, not with emotion, but with the cool, clinical precision of a nurse delivering a grim diagnosis. I told him about the redecorating, the slow isolation, the signing of the trust that I had so foolishly agreed to. I presented the symptoms of the sickness that had infected my family. He listened without a single interruption, his steepled fingers pressed against his lips, his coffee growing cold on his desk. When I finished, the silence in the dusty, book-lined room was heavy. "The monster," he finally said, his voice a low growl of controlled fury. "She is not just a gold digger, Margaret. She is a sadist." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine, and in them, I saw the first glimmer of hope I had felt in years. He believed me. "First things first, you are in a very dangerous position. You have signed documents that give her almost total control. We have to assume that every dollar, every asset is at risk. From this moment on, you do nothing without speaking to me first. And we need proof," he continued. "Hard, undeniable proof that a judge can see and a jury can understand. Right now, it is your word against the word of a charming, successful professional with your son-in-law as her loving character witness. We would lose. What do I do?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and renewed strength. "You go home," he said, his voice firm, "and you become the sweet, slightly confused old woman she thinks you are. You agree to everything. You make her feel completely, utterly secure. Her arrogance is going to be our greatest weapon. And while you are playing your part, we are going to start digging into her past, and you are going to become a spy in your own home." Returning to the house that afternoon was like a soldier returning to enemy territory, but this time I had a mission and an ally. I began the performance of a lifetime. I shuffled my feet. I forgot where I put my reading glasses. I apologized to Chloe for being so difficult lately, blaming it on old age. I saw the condescending pity in her eyes and knew my act was working. She believed I was a spent force, a non-threat. Her guard came down completely. Daniel, true to his word, immediately hired a private investigator, a discreet former police detective named Frank, to do a deep dive into Chloe's past. Who was she, really? Where did she come from? What was the real story behind her successful career? Frank's job was to hunt for a pattern, for other families, for other convenient tragedies. My job was to gather evidence from the inside. A week later, a small anonymous package arrived for me, sent to a post office box Daniel had set up. Inside were my tools for the resistance. There was a simple USB charging plug that was, in fact, a high-fidelity audio recorder. There was a sleek, expensive-looking fountain pen that was, in fact, a high-definition video camera. And there was a tiny, button-sized GPS tracker. That evening, a new kind of fear, a thrilling, purposeful fear, coursed through me. While Chloe was in the shower and David was reading to Leo, I went to work. I swapped the USB charger in the main kitchen outlet, the house's central hub, with the one Daniel had sent. It was a place Chloe often plugged in her phone while she cooked and took calls. I took the GPS tracker and, my hands shaking slightly, slipped it deep into the lining of her primary handbag, the one she took with her everywhere. The camera pen was the easiest. I simply left it, as if forgotten, in the pen cup on the desk in the study that Chloe had commandeered as her office. That night, lying in bed, I felt a profound shift in the dynamics of the house. For the first time in over a year, I was not the only one being watched. Living a double life was exhausting. I had to be constantly vigilant, maintaining my mask of gentle confusion while my mind was worrying, calculating, observing. Every meal was a performance. Every conversation was a potential source of intelligence. A few days after planning the devices, I reaped my first harvest. Chloe had a long, intense phone call in the kitchen, her back to the USB charger that was silently recording her every word. That night, after waiting for the house to fall into a deep, quiet sleep, I retrieved the device, huddled in my bathroom with the door locked, a towel stuffed against the crack at the bottom to block any light. I plugged it into a small laptop Daniel had given me and put in the earbuds. What I heard made the hair on my arm stand up. It was Chloe, talking to someone who was clearly her lawyer. Her voice was not the warm, caring tone she used with us. It was cold, sharp, and ruthless. "The trust is ironclad," she was saying. "Margaret signed everything. She has no power. David is a non-issue. He does whatever I say. The next step is to begin liquidating the portfolio assets. I want to move the funds offshore by the end of the quarter. The house is the final piece. We can put it on the market in the spring." It was all there. A cold, calculated confession of her intent to steal everything we owned. The camera pen yielded its own treasures. It captured crystal-clear video of her forging David's signature on a bank document and of her reviewing papers for a life insurance policy I did not know existed. Each night became a ritual. I would gather the data, listen, watch, and then upload everything to a secure, encrypted online folder Daniel had created. The folder was our war room, a growing mountain of undeniable proof. My quiet guest room had become the headquarters of a resistance movement. They all thought I was fading away, a relic of the past being gently ushered into the twilight. But in the shadows, I was becoming something else entirely. I was a quiet old woman, a retired nurse, and I was meticulously cataloging the evidence that would bring down the monster who was sleeping just down the hall. The fight for my family and for my daughter's memory had truly begun. The call from Daniel came on a Monday morning, a week before the planned mountain trip. His voice was different. The usual gruffness was gone, replaced by a tone so grim it sent a shard of ice through my veins. "Margaret," he said, "Frank found something. I think you need to see this. Can you meet me now?" I invented a sudden, excruciating migraine that required an emergency trip to the pharmacy, a performance of weakness that Chloe, deep in her own planning, accepted with an irritated wave of her hand. An hour later, I was sitting in Daniel's dusty, book-lined office, a thick file folder lying on the desk between us like an unexploded bomb. "Chloe wasn't just a financial advisor," Daniel said, his voice low as he pushed the folder toward me. "She specialized in what Frank calls end-of-life wealth management, and you are not her first family." I opened the folder. The next hour was a descent into a nightmare of meticulous, predatory evil. Inside were pages of meticulous research compiled by the private investigator, There was a case from 7 years ago in Ohio. An elderly, wealthy widower, recently deceased from a sudden, massive heart attack. He had married his charming financial advisor, a woman who went by the name Catherine Finch, but whose photo was undeniably Chloe, just 6 months prior. Upon his death, his entire estate, which his children had expected to inherit, went to his new wife. The children had contested the will, citing undue influence and the suspicious timing of his death, but they had no concrete proof. The case was dismissed. There was another one 4 years ago. A retired couple in Florida. They had signed all their assets over to a family trust managed by a brilliant advisor named Eliza Thorne. Shortly after, the husband died on a cruise ship, a tragic accidental fall overboard during a storm. His wife, heartbroken and reportedly confused with early-onset dementia, was moved into an exclusive high-end nursing facility where she died of a sudden pneumonia within the year. The trust's sole beneficiary and trustee was, of course, the advisor, Chloe. The pattern was a cold, repeating melody of death and profit. She found grieving families with substantial assets. She ingratiated herself, gained absolute control of their finances through trusts, and then their lives would end conveniently and tragically, leaving her in sole possession of everything. But it was the last page of the report that made the air leave my lungs in a painful rush. It was a copy of a birth certificate, Chloe's birth certificate. Her real name was Chloe Ann Devereaux, and on the line for her mother's name was a name I recognized, Eleanor Devereaux. Eleanor had been a nurse at my hospital 25 years ago, a younger woman in a different department. I remembered her vaguely. A quiet, troubled woman who was fired for stealing prescription medication from the hospital pharmacy. A few years later, I'd heard she had died of an overdose, leaving a young daughter behind. "She has a vendetta?" I whispered, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. "She grew up in the system. She blames the world, maybe even the medical profession, for what happened to her mother, and she's making her victims pay." "It's more than that, Margaret," Daniel said, his face grim. He turned the page. "Look at this. Frank uncovered it this morning. Chloe took out this policy last week. It just cleared underwriting." It was a life insurance policy, a very large, multi-million-dollar policy. On David. My blood ran cold. The mountain trip, their special anniversary getaway to a remote cabin. It wasn't a celebration. It was a venue. I had been so focused on her stealing our money, on her trying to prove me incompetent, that I had missed the real target. The final piece of her plan wasn't to sideline me. It was to get rid of David. With me already declared mentally incompetent and David gone, she would have everything. Sole, uncontested control of the entire estate. And worst of all, she would have my grandson, Leo, all to herself. "We have to go to the police," I said, my voice shaking as I shot to my feet. "We have to stop them from leaving." "And say what?" Daniel countered, his voice sharp but steady, pulling me back from the edge of panic. "That his wife took out an insurance policy on him? That is not a crime? That she has a suspicious past with other wealthy spouses who died? It is all circumstantial. They will not act on a suspicion of future harm, Margaret. She will deny everything, call you a delusional old woman, and David will back her up. She will walk away, more careful than ever, and we will lose our one and only chance to stop her." He was right. We were trapped in a nightmare of logic. We had a narrative, but not enough proof to move the hand of the law. "Then what do we do?" I pleaded. "We cannot just let him go with her." "No," Daniel said, his eyes hardening. "We will not. We are going to set a trap of our own. We need her to confess, or we need her to make an overt move against you. We need something undeniable, something we can get on tape." The plan he laid out was audacious and terrifying. It required me to become the lead actor in the final, most dangerous scene of this tragedy. The day before their scheduled trip, I was to suffer a fall. I would feign confusion and acute distress, insisting that I could not possibly be left alone, thus forcing Chloe to cancel their trip. Then, that evening, with David conveniently sent out of the house on a long, pointless errand, I would confront her. I would wear a wire, a tiny, sensitive microphone Daniel would provide. He and Frank, the investigator, would be parked in an unmarked van down the street, listening to a live feed, with a police tactical team on standby, ready to move in the second they had what they needed. "You have to provoke her," Daniel warned, his gaze intense. This woman is a predator, but she is also arrogant. You have to dismantle that arrogance. You have to show her that you know everything about the other families, about her mother, about the insurance policy. You have to make her feel trapped. That is when the mask will drop. That is when she will make a mistake. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through me. The thought of being alone in that house with her, knowing what she was capable of, was almost paralyzing. But then I saw Leo's face in my mind, his innocent eyes, his trusting smile. What would happen to him if their plans succeeded? He would be raised by the woman who murdered his father and had spent years trying to erase his mother. The fear did not vanish, but it was overwhelmed by a tidal wave of protective love. I had no choice. I would not let her have him. The fall was horribly convincing. On Friday morning, as Chloe was bringing their bags down to the front hall, I tripped on the top step of the main staircase. I did not throw myself down, but rather crumpled, letting my body tumble down the last few steps in a sickening, uncontrolled heap. The pain that shot through my hip and shoulder was real and excruciating, but I amplified it, letting out a cry of agony, feigning dizziness and a hazy disorientation. Chloe's frustration was a palpable force, a barely concealed flicker of pure rage behind her mask of frantic concern. Their romantic, murderous getaway was ruined. David, horrified, insisted they cancel the trip immediately. I was rushed to the emergency room, where the doctors, finding only severe bruising, prescribed rest and painkillers. The trap was set. That evening, the house was thick with a tense, cloying atmosphere. Chloe was playing the role of the dutiful nurse, fluffing my pillows and bringing me tea, her movements tight with suppressed anger. Just as Daniel had planned, I waited until around 9 o'clock and then began to complain of a specific severe nerve pain. I insisted that the only thing that had ever worked was a rare European topical cream, and that the only pharmacy in the city that might have it was a 24-hour 145 minutes away. David, racked with guilt and eager to be helpful, did not hesitate. He was out the door in minutes, leaving me alone with my would-be executioner's wife. And then we were alone. Chloe was pacing in the living room, a caged tiger, her perfect plans in disarray. I sat in a large armchair, a study in frail vulnerability, the tiny, powerful microphone taped securely beneath the collar of my nightgown. "Chloe," I began, my voice quiet but clear, cutting through the silence. "We need to talk. About Eleanor Devereaux." She froze mid-stride. She turned to me slowly, her face a blank canvas, but her eyes, for the very first time, showed a flicker of genuine animal fear. "I have no idea who you are talking about," she said, her voice like ice. "I think you do," I pressed on, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my voice steady. "She was your mother. I remember her. She worked at my hospital, a sad woman. She had a daughter who she felt the world had failed, a daughter who grew up believing she was owed something, a daughter who made a career out of preying on grieving, vulnerable families." I saw her composure begin to crack. I pushed myself up from the chair, ignoring the searing pain in my hip, and took a slow step toward her. "I know about the widower in Ohio, Catherine. I know about the couple who died on the cruise, Eliza, and I know about the new life insurance policy you just took out on David. Was his accidental fall at Eagles Peak supposed to happen tomorrow? Was that the plan all along?" All the color drained from her face. The mask did not just crack, it shattered. The charming, sophisticated woman was gone, replaced by a cornered, feral creature. "You meddling old fool," she hissed, her voice low and venomous, stripped of all its polished elegance. "You have no idea what you have done." "Oh, I think I do," I said, pushing the final button, speaking the words Daniel had told me would trigger the end. "And I have already spoken to the authorities. They know everything." That was the mistake Daniel had predicted she would count on me making alone. She panicked. In her mind, the police were not on their way. She believed I had already sealed her fate. With no way out, her only remaining option was to eliminate the witness. With a snarl of pure rage, she lunged not at me, but at the fireplace, grabbing the heavy iron poker from its stand. "I should have dealt with you months ago," she screamed, her face a grotesque mask of shock and hatred as she raised it high. "You were just a loose end, but now you have signed your own death warrant." But before she could take another step, the front door, the one David had carefully locked behind him, burst open, splintering from its frame. In an instant, the room was filled with heavily armed police officers in tactical gear, their weapons aimed directly at her. Daniel and Frank were right behind them, their faces grim. Chloe froze, the poker held aloft, her mouth open in a silent scream of disbelief. She was trapped. She was finished. And the tiny microphone beneath my collar, broadcasting to the van down the street, had captured every single self-incriminating word. The war was over. The sound of the front door splintering from its frame was the explosive end to Chloe's reign of terror. For a moment, the world was a chaotic tableau of motion and noise. Uniformed figures flooded the room, their voices sharp, authoritative commands that cut through the tense silence. Chloe froze, the heavy iron poker held aloft, her face a grotesque mask of pure, murderous rage turning to slack-jawed disbelief. She dropped the weapon with a loud clang on the hearthstone. Hands, strong and sure, pulled me back, shielding me. Other officers swarmed Chloe, and the fight went out of her instantly. The cornered predator, seeing the overwhelming force, reverted to a cold, still compliance. She did not scream or struggle as they forced her hands behind her back and the metallic click of handcuffs echoed in the living room. I was shaking, a deep cellular tremor of adrenaline and shock. Daniel and Frank rushed to my side. "It's over, Margaret," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're safe now." A calm, uniformed officer approached me. "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant Riley. Are you injured?" "No," I managed to say, my voice a hoarse whisper. I pointed to the collar of my nightgown. "The microphone is here. You have everything." The true wreckage of the night was yet to be discovered. A few minutes later, David's car pulled into the driveway. He walked in, his face etched with concern, carrying a small paper bag from the pharmacy. He stopped dead in the entryway, his eyes widening in horror at the scene before him. His home filled with police, his wife in handcuffs, and me, his mother-in-law, surrounded by investigators. "What is going on?" he stammered, looking from face to face in utter confusion. Chloe stared at him, her expression turning from shock to pure, venomous contempt. "He's a fool," she spat at the officers. "He believes anything I tell him." It was Daniel who stepped forward to intercept him, gently guiding him away from the chaos and into the dining room. I could not hear their words, but I saw the color drain from David's face. I watched his body slump as Daniel presented him with the cold, undeniable truth of his wife's monstrous deception. I saw him finally understand that the woman he loved had never existed. The man who had entered the house 10 minutes ago was gone, and a broken, shattered stranger stood in his place. The months that followed were a blur of legal proceedings. They were cold, methodical, and impersonal, a necessary antiseptic to cleanse the deep septic wound Chloe had inflicted on our lives. My evidence formed the ironclad core of the prosecution's case. The secret audio recordings were played in the silent, stunned courtroom. The jurors heard Chloe's voice, cold and ruthless, as she discussed liquidating our assets and her contempt for me. They heard her final rage-filled confession, captured by the wire as she threatened my life. Frank's investigation provided the devastating context. The authorities in Ohio and Florida reopened their cases. The families of her previous victims came forward, their old dismissed suspicions now validated. Chloe was not just a con artist, she was a serial predator who had left a trail of death and broken families in her wake. The financial trail was a complex web of shell corporations and offshore accounts, but with the documents from the camera pen as a starting point, forensic accountants unraveled it all. They proved her intent to defraud us of everything we owned. Chloe's trial was a media spectacle. She was remorseless, a black hole of narcissism. Her lawyers attempting to paint me as a vindictive, mentally unstable old woman who had entrapped her. But the recordings did not lie. The numbers did not lie. Her history did not lie. The verdict was swift, guilty, on all counts. The judge sentenced her to multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and theft. With the other states waiting in line to prosecute her for the deaths of her other victims, she would die in prison. As they led her away for the last time, she looked at me, and her eyes were not angry. They were empty. Justice, in its cold and impartial way, had been served. With Chloe gone, a strange, quiet peace settled over the house. But it was a fragile peace, built on the rubble of our old lives. The house itself felt tainted. Every room held a memory of her manipulation. Every corner echoed with a lie. David was a ghost, haunted by his own misplaced trust and the horrifying truth of the woman he had married. He was consumed by a guilt so profound it was like a physical illness. Guilt over how he had allowed Chloe to treat me, and how he had failed to protect Sarah's memory for their son. Our relationship was a chasm of unspoken pain and regret. He could barely look at me. His shame was so great. It was Leo, in his simple, innocent wisdom, who began to build a bridge across that chasm. He saw his father's sadness, and he would crawl into his lap in the evenings, patting his cheek. "It's okay, Daddy," he would say. "Grandma is here. She fixes everything." He was right. I was here. I had to be. My family, though broken, was not destroyed. One evening, I sat down with David in the quiet living room. "We have to talk about this," I said gently. "We cannot let her poison us forever." He finally broke, the words spilling out in a torrent of anguish and apology. "I am so sorry, Margaret. I was a fool. I let her turn me against you. I let her hurt you? And Sarah? I let her dishonor Sarah's memory. How can you ever forgive me?" "Forgiveness is not the issue right now, David," I told him, my voice soft but firm. "Healing is the issue. We have to heal for him." I nodded toward the stairs where Leo was sleeping. "He needs us. He needs his father." A few weeks later, David came to me with a sheaf of legal papers. "I want you to formally adopt Leo with me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It is not just a legal thing. It's a symbolic one. You were always his mother in every way that mattered. When I failed to protect him, you were the one who saved him. I want him to always know, legally and forever, that he has you." We became, officially and unofficially, a new kind of family, forged not in joy, but in survival and a fierce, tested love. We did not stay at the Willows. The memories were too heavy, the ghosts too real. We sold the house and all the cold, sterile furniture Chloe had filled it with. We bought a new home, a smaller, brighter place by the sea, with large windows that let in the light. It was a place with no history, a blank page on which we could write our own future. David slowly came back to life. He started therapy. He took a long leave of absence from work to spend time with Leo, rebuilding the bond that Chloe had tried to sever. He began to design again, but his focus had changed. He designed community centers, libraries, and schools, buildings meant for healing and growth. I found a new purpose, too. With a portion of the assets we recovered, I worked with Daniel to start a small foundation in Sarah's name. We call it the Sarah Project, and it provides free legal aid and financial counseling for victims of elder fraud and domestic financial abuse. My experience had given me a unique voice, and I was determined to use it to help others avoid the nightmare we had endured. My pain had been transmuted into a mission. Leo thrived, surrounded by the truth of his mother's love and the fierce, protective devotion of his father and grandmother. He grew into a kind, confident, and happy boy. The shadow of Chloe faded, becoming a strange, distant story from a life that no longer seemed real. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I sit on our new porch, the scent of salt in the air, watching the waves roll in and out in their eternal rhythm. Leo, now older, will often sit with me. The other day, we were looking through one of Sarah's photo albums, the one I had hidden away in my secret war room and had since recovered. He was quiet for a long time, tracing a picture of his mother holding him as a baby. "So," he said thoughtfully, "I guess I was right. I do have two moms." "Yes, you do," I said, putting my arm around his shoulders. "Mommy Sarah is my star mom," he said, a concept he had invented himself. "She's the one who is always in my heart and watches over me from the sky." "That is right," I whispered. "And you are my grandma mom," he concluded, leaning his head against my shoulder. "You are the one who is here and who fights the monsters." I held him tight, tears blurring the sunset. I had once believed that love, a caregiver's love, had to be soft, unconditional, and endlessly forgiving. I have learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is to be hard. It is to be vigilant, it is to fight, it is to draw a line in the sand and refuse to let evil cross it. True love is not just a sanctuary. Sometimes it must also be a fortress. And in the heart of our small, battered, and beautiful family, We had finally, after a long and terrible war, found our peace,